I walked my little butt over there, tail between the legs, and I was like, hey, like, do you remember me? But I was like sexually assaulted by my brother's friend when we lived there. I held on to it as it was my fault for a really, really long time. And I think just the first step is like acknowledging that like you don't have control of other people's evils. I wasn't happy of where I was sitting at. I didn't like who I had become. I didn't like who I had surrounded myself with.
Maybe the biggest part of my story is just my family.
I moved to Vero Beach for flight school.
Playing football especially, I would get invited to a lot of parties.
During this time, he's like full weight on this knife trying to plunge it in there.
Like knowing the Lord brings me so much peace and joy and just confidence.
So I held this dude as he took his last breath, and it triggered this question and said, what is this life for?
Yo, 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 what is up, party people? Welcome to another episode of Thrive and Dive, thriving in life as we dive into deeper conversations. The purpose of this show is to help you thrive in life, and I bring on people that I feel are thriving in life, and they either share their testimony or areas of expertise. And I'm joined here today by my good friend, Laura Prinsen-Balu.
Hello. Familiar face.
Yes, Laura has been on the podcast before. How are you doing today, Laura?
I'm doing wonderful.
Love it.
Yes.
Thank you so much. You've been on before, and you've decided that you are willing to come back on again. Wow. So how was that experience last time you've been on Thrive and Dive?
It was good. It was amazing. I feel like it's always fun to have deep conversations, no superficial stuff. Does get toasty in here, though.
It does, in this podcast room with all the lights and low AC so that the sound is as crisp as possible. It gets a little hot in here. Maybe you've noticed in our previous episodes, sweat rolling down some of our faces.
Overall, great time. A little toasty, but we vibe.
A little toasty, but we can take the heat, both in temperature-wise and in terms of the conversation.
Can you take the heat?
Can you take the heat? We just went into the hottest room and did a podcast. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah. Awesome. Great. Well, we're filming this in the month of April, but this could be released months later. So I'm thankful that you're here. We're ending the season of some college classes, I believe.
Yes.
How's that all going?
Yeah, went well. All A's so far.
Let's go.
Keep on keeping on. Yeah.
Let's go.
Organic chemistry, hard, doable.
Ooh.
But I got that A.
Doable.
Hey.
Yeah, but hard indeed. Organic chemistry. And remind me again what your dreams and ambitions are with studying something as cruel as organic
right,
chemistry.
with all the torture.
Yeah.
So my major is biology. So the goal is pre-professional. I'm leaning more towards pharmacy and that whole realm just of chemistry. It's so funny. I do like chemistry. I really enjoy it. So something to do with math, numbers, chemistry. So that's where I'm leaning towards pharmacy.
Awesome.
Yeah. So studying for those PCATs.
Yeah. Well, God bless you and your efforts. Yes. Important job indeed. And keep on keeping on, like you said. So that's awesome.
It's the only option. There's only one option.
Let's go. So for context, if you've watched previous episodes with Laura on it, you know a bit about her story, and that's what we're jumping into today. But Laura and I have had the pleasure of serving together in Pathway Students Ministry. We both took a turn being students and Pathway students. I remember I think I've talked to you this before, when I was a senior, just graduating from high school, that final summer before I headed out to college, you and I were on the same team.
The green team.
The Green Gators. Now, currently we do a thing called Summer Olympics, which is a summer programming, but back then it was called The Race, I think.
Yeah.
Because Pastor Nate Swearingen didn't grace us with his presence yet. He came a little later.
Yeah.
Shout out to Pastor Adam, the pastor at the time. And we were on the same team, but I didn't know you. I remember actually having a photo of you and another girl, and then years later, fast forward.
Now we're besties.
Oh, it's you. Yeah. How about that? Besties on a podcast.
Exactly.
Who would have thunk it, right? Goodness, we should have worn green.
No, we're going on double dates and all this fun stuff.
I know, we're going double dates. Shout out to
our significant others.
Significant others. Yes. Wow. There you go. That's what's up.
Funny.
Man, maybe we need to do a double date podcast episode with the four of us.
Table that, but yes.
Table that, but yes. Okay.
That'd be so good.
That'd be super. Yeah. But super thankful for you, Laura. And I've heard bits and pieces of your story already. But I'm just looking forward to hearing parts maybe I've heard already, and also maybe some new angles that I've not heard before. And as we've shared multiple times here on Thrive and Dive, we all have a story. And we have an opportunity to leverage it for God's glory if you're a Christian. And God knows every bit of our story. He's not shocked when things happen in our story that maybe we're like, why in the world did that happen? No, everything according to Romans 8:28, all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. And that scripture is so true and so real. So even the most low valleys of our story are working for our good and for God's glory. And so Laura, man, talk to us. I can't remember, are you a Vero local? Were you born and raised here?
Well, not born, but basically raised. I lived here since I was 8. Yeah.
Since 8. Cool.
Almost 23.
Almost 23. Wow.
Yeah.
Where were you before that?
New Hampshire, but then I was born in Minnesota.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah,
Whoa. Wow.
Experienced traveler on your hands.
Yeah, for real. Moved to Minnesota, New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Then what brought you to the beautiful Sunshine State?
Yeah. My mom's work. So
nice.
They decided when my brother and I were, I think I was 8 and he was
Shout
11?
out to Oliver.
Yeah, shout out Oliver. Hey. Yeah, my parents wanted to move. We lived in like a small town in New Hampshire that was kind of not the best environment to have kids in, just like lower economy class, lower level.
Yeah.
And then, they decided to move and we're looking around Florida and then they found Vero.
Wow.
Yeah. So per backstory, my mom is a doctor.
Okay.
So she was like, okay, I want to like go somewhere
I don't
nicer.
think I knew that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Nice.
Yeah. So now she does family medicine, just like a regular PCP.
Awesome.
But yeah, so that's what brought us here. And then we just stayed ever since.
Is her career field kind of something that inspired you to go into science and medicine? Okay.
Yeah. So my mom's mom was a nurse and then my mom is a doctor, and then kind of just seeing like the whole environment of healthcare. I know I don't necessarily want to go that route, but it's definitely what inspired me to enjoy like sciences and be more propelled toward that direction.
Gotcha. That's super cool. Awesome. So moved here when you're 8 years old.
Yeah.
Talk to us about, life here in Vero Beach as a young Laura Prinsen-Balu.
Right. Yeah. So young Laura was a little more introverted, I will say. Yeah, I know. Surprise.
No way.
Hey. I know. I'm very bubbly and I'm very outgoing, but there was a time when I was that young, from ages probably like 6 to really 12, 13, were more introverted, less confident in myself, I'd say, due to just a lot of identity issues and just struggling with self-worth, all of that fun stuff that you deal with as a girl.
Yeah.
From personal experience, we moved from New Hampshire on the premise of my mom got a better job. But I was sexually assaulted by my brother's friend when we lived there for a good 1.5 2 years. So I was 6, 7.
Wow.
Yeah. So after that, came to light, whatever. So that's what really was like, okay, yeah, we're moving. So with that, it was a lot harder for me to comprehend that it wasn't my fault. So I feel like I definitely held on to it as, oh, well, I just ruined our entire experience of New Hampshire, which obviously, being who I am now, I've come to terms with that.
Yeah.
And I kind of just don't hold on to the hate of it, but more I would love to talk with people who have experienced that and kind of shine the light on it.
Yeah.
But that's what brought me into Florida. So then it was kind of just a matter of coping and moving forward and all of that stuff. And I hid a lot of it, a lot of the hurt, a lot of the pain. I kind of just kept to myself, and then outgrew the introvertedness, but showed up in a different way of, oh, I am the happy-go-lucky kid,
Yeah.
And that's where I kind of sit now, but I kind of grew into that personality of no one else is going to know that I'm sad,
Yeah, sure.
And so it's definitely a 2 different lives of, I feel really bad on the inside, super happy on the outside, which is how I wanted people to see it. So that's kind of where I sat from 12 to really till I got saved. I was kind of just internalizing all of my emotions, not really process anything. When
at what point, from the sexual assault to moving to Florida, did you start to struggle with those identity issues? Was it right after, or
no? Yeah. I mean, so honestly, I didn't really deal with it until about a year or 2 ago.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. So there was moments that I completely couldn't even tell you, don't even remember really, until I really sat down with my mom and talked it through with her and just got the clarity of really what went down and what happened. So yeah, I kind of I internalized that the longest, and I think that's where like looking back probably is what started the coping mechanism of not seeking help, but rather just like finding other like things to feel better with rather than turning to God or just like seeking out counsel, you know?
Yeah. Processing it in a biblical manner. Yeah. So I had another question with that, but I totally forgot it.
That's okay.
To
backstory though. So my parents aren't saved. So it wasn't in that way. I didn't know any better not to seek God, if that makes sense. It wasn't around me.
You're ignorant of that fact.
Exactly. Yeah. So growing up now, like obviously to like futurize, sorry.
Shout out.
To look towards the future, I would definitely raise my kids in a biblical manner of like knowing who God is, you know, just like a different lifestyle. Because I wish I had that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where my heart sits now. And it goes into my testimony of like wanting to help people who have struggled with that and like help girls and like be with like high schoolers, middle schoolers that could be struggling with that, just to like realize that they have someone who's on their side and who is going to help them process things and heal, whereas like nothing else is going to make you feel any better.
Yeah,
you know
absolutely.
what I mean?
Yeah. Man, so that's praise God for all that, Laura. Yeah, because that's something that you shouldn't have had to go through, and oof.
Yeah.
So with that being said, I know it's kind of more fresher in the sense of it's only been a couple of years since you've kind of gotten processed through that. But just a quick, I know could be a whole longer episode, and maybe it should be. And obviously, I'm not a professional or anything. But for those who are listening who's experienced similar things like that, what's the quick? Nothing can be quick, but what's the first step you would recommend them take to start overcoming that evil that was done to them?
Yeah, I think just speaking from experience, obviously, I'm not professional either, but I held on to it as it was my fault for a really, really long time. And I think just the first step is like acknowledging that like you don't have control of other people's evils, if that makes sense, and coming to terms with just the fact that like if you like I was younger, so it's like I was just a kid. Who am I to know any better, you know? So I think the first step is just acknowledging that like nothing you could have done would have changed their actions. Which I think I sat with for a while of like, oh, I should have done this differently. I should have done that differently. But in reality, nothing I could have done was going to change any of the things that they did. And then just like moving on from that, I think just accepting the fact that God will use you. I think where I sat on it was that story will always haunt me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then turning forward and looking to God and being like, okay, well, I'm not going to sit on it and victimize myself because let's move on. You know, you can't sit on that forever and just sulk. And I think a lot of the times that's what people do, and it makes you rotten on the inside and just bitter. And that wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want to sit there bitter. I went through enough and was like sad enough. I was like, this can't be another thing to hold on to. So like out of experience, I just say like, just know that, and it's so much easier said than done.
Sure.
Just, just know God's gonna use you. You know?
God's gonna use you.
But it's so true though, because it's like you can sit there and tell yourself that all day long, but it's like, do you really truly believe it?
Yeah.
And I guess like shout out this movie, but the Shack, it's like a movie based on.
I've heard of it.
You've heard of it.
I haven't watched it, but yeah.
And so basically there's a scene in that movie which I cried, but the dad is like holding his daughter and is just repeating to himself, I forgive you, of the girl, like speaking towards the guy that took his daughter or whatever. Yeah. And like that just like moved in me because it was just like, it truly is just your heart posture that's going to change. You're not going to change anything about them. You can't do anything about it at that point, but it's like you can change your heart posture and be, okay, well, I'm stronger than them. I'm better than them. I have God, so I'm going to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. You know? No, that's good, Laura. I hope you guys were able to catch all that.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, as an outsider looking in, because that's personally not part of my story, but I think I see something that you've extrapolated so well is you can't be defined by this past incident that happened to you. And you even said we shouldn't be victimized by it. We can't see ourselves as now like damaged goods. We're now broken forever. No, you don't have to be defined by your sin or the sin that's done against you.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely harder to do, 100%. But I think once you start like really focusing in on that and like trying to forgive that person along with yourself and knowing that it wasn't your fault are good steps for real.
Absolutely. Like you said, easier said than done, but you need to make that first step. So talk to me, Laura, about that 12 years old to where you, to the point when you got saved. You're talking about how you were trying to be the go-lucky, happy person, but at the same time, you're just like dying inside.
Right.
Tell us about that experience. Not that we want you to relive it. Tell us about that experience and then how that set the dark backdrop for an awesome opportunity to come to Christ.
Yeah, exactly. Dark backdrop is a good one. So I'm actually the product of someone inviting me to church. So that's how I kind of came to know Christ and started to like really know even what and who God was. When I was in 6th grade, so 12, I had a friend who invited me to this church, to Pathways Student Ministries. And that's kind of where I got my foot in the door of like, oh, okay, like I know this, I know that, kind of an introduction to what the church is and who God was, but not truly holding on to that, if that makes sense. So then fast forward, I am the go-lucky person. I want to make everyone happy. Everyone should be laughing, you know. And I held on to that for a really long time and sacrificed my own happiness and just making sure that everyone else, people pleasing. Number one problem in females. We want to people please. Yeah, exactly. So, and I think, and I still struggle with that. And I was going to say that earlier. I was like, no one's perfect about healing and that whole journey, but like, I still struggle with people pleasing. I want to make everyone happy. But I hear it a lot of, you got to fill your cup up before you pour out for others. Obviously, you can't make everyone happy. You need to focus on you and your relationship. And I can see that now, but then it was more, FOMO, you know, an angsty teenager.
Sure, just normal kind of
but I think that,
syndromes.
That angst turned into a darker path that wouldn't have been necessary had I kicked myself a little harder and maybe learned more about who God was, you know? So
what do you think lies as the root to wanting to people please? Like what caused us to want to do that? And it is a common phenomenon. I deal with it and I have an answer, but I want to hear your answer.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. I feel like there's a lot of things. I think it goes back to like nurture and nature of how you were raised and your biological like predisposition to wanting to like serve, if that makes sense, and like help others.
Sure, maybe you're more wired to be a helper. Okay, yeah.
For me, I think it just comes from a place of being anxious and nervous and thinking, oh, they're not going to like me if I don't do this, or, you know. And I struggle with that for years. And that goes into the identity of just low self-worth of, oh, anything I do isn't going to work out in my favor, which ridiculous, you know? But I would really think that need to make everyone like me would be the underlying factor for myself of like people pleasing.
Even more to that. And you're right on. Why do we want people to like us? Like, is that just an innate desire? Or
I feel like it is. I mean, at least I'm going to just speak for myself, but like, I feel like for females in general, like we want to be liked. You want to be liked. I think it's just like a desire. It's a fleshly desire. It's not coming from God. We should only really have goals of glorifying the kingdom. You know, it should be, if it's not glorifying to God and it's not good for you, what are we doing? You know? But I think it comes back to that fleshly desire of, no, I want to be the best. I want people to like me, you know? And then that goes to, oh, well, do they not like me enough? You know?
Yeah. Gotcha. No, I think you're spot on. And I would add to that by referring to a Bible verse. I believe in Proverbs, it says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. A lot of times, specifically in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, refers to people being God-fearing. They fear God, not in the sense of being terrified of him, but in the sense of having so much respect and honor towards his name. And unfortunately, a big problem with people pleasing is we take that fear that's supposed to be towards God and we put it towards our peers. Yeah. Like I'm fearful of my peer. I have so much respect, and not that we shouldn't respect our peers, but like maybe they have too much weight in our lives, and they can, because we just want them to like us so badly.
Fear of judgment over fear of God.
Fear of judgment over the fear of God. And that misplaced fears cause us to do some things that we normally wouldn't do in any other circumstance. But because we want so badly to have the attention of those people that we honestly idolize, we will do different things in order to get that. But if our fear is towards God and he's our center of worship, there will be less of a temptation to really be a people pleaser. Obviously, helping people's good. That's a godly thing to do. Love God, love other. But if it's driven because of this like angst and like fear, I don't think that's properly motivated love.
I feel like if you're putting yourself down in order to help or not help someone else, but like put someone else's like worth and opinions over your own, I feel like is an unhealthy way of, people pleasing. So
yeah, absolutely. And that, people pleasing is kind of an isolated thing. And then there could obviously these things can overlap, but then the issue you're saying about filling other people's cup with, an empty bucket is another problem where it's like, we're not God,
right.
We're supposed to be connected to the vine, to the streams of living water, and that out of the overflow of a healthy state, we bless other people. If we're constantly, we got to be the helper. And if you're an Enneagram 2, if you believe in the Enneagram, the helper is someone who has a predisposition to this, like helping people. I personally don't have that predisposition, but I do have people pleasing tendencies, but it's not because I just want to be a helper. It's because usually it's because I care about my reputation too much. But
understandable.
There's different layers and motivators to people pleasing in that whole conversation. So that's interesting. So talk to us about how you made that shift. And like you said, it's a lifelong journey. It's not like you don't ever struggle with people pleasing anymore. You're flawless, know. But talk to us about how that's waned a little bit, and then kind of how coming to Christ caused that to dissipate a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. So just going back to that general age timeline, I'd say just high school of people pleasing and struggling. Any teenage girl is going to know people are mean regardless. Girls are mean, so you're in that constant struggle of what do I do? What do I think? What do I wear? So that it grows heavy on you. And I think I turned my people pleasing and just like more of my fleshly desires into focusing, which is going to sound so silly, but focusing so heavily on school and athletics, which don't sound like bad things.
Sure.
But when you're idolizing, if I don't get an A in this class, I'm worth what? And I put a lot of pressure on myself that I needed to do this, do that, get the grades, get into the school, play lacrosse, and it didn't hit me until COVID 2020 of realizing, I'm not happy with this. But instead of turning to God and really being able to see my identity through him and know that I am worthy and that, he created me with a purpose, I turned to a different path and really started hanging out with not the best people, people who I considered my friends, who I still have contact with, who I went to high school with. We were friends. We are friends. But just indulging in certain activities and just not walking the path that I would have wished I had, and that I try and help other girls that are in that age get away from, and just acknowledging that who you surround yourself with is important. The actions you choose to do now are important and will affect roles of shame and guilt later on. Not saying that's a good thing, but just knowing that like if you don't watch out for yourself now, you're gonna have to deal with that later,
Absolutely.
And so that's really where I put a lot of my identity in, and just it weighed on me, and that went into going to the wrong school that I ended up being at for 2.5 years and going down an even darker path. And just feeling really, really low and just having no worth at all. But again, my grades were perfect. I was doing good in sports,
Yeah.
And that's where I put most of my identity in. And I did well in those things,
Yeah.
So on the outside, to make a long story short, I made sure that a certain area of my life was perfect to a T, and then forgot about the rest.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the times we do that, where we hold one specific thing as an idol in our lives, not realizing that just because I get A's in class doesn't mean I'm a good person,
Yeah.
And just because I am gifted academically or gifted athletically doesn't mean I'm doing the right steps outside of that. And again, it goes into being a Christian. You say you follow Christ and you want to do all of these things, but are you acting in a certain manner outside of that? Does that make sense?
Totally.
So fast forward into coming back home and getting saved, I was able to like see those flaws and acknowledge that probably not the best to surround myself with people who are drinking when you're not legally able to drink, Yeah. So it's just like all of those things wrapped up into one of like, I wasn't happy of where I was sitting at. I didn't like who I had become. I didn't like who I had surrounded myself with. And then I felt trapped.
Yeah.
Simplest way to put it. I was still having ideas of like, I want to make good for myself. I want to have these plans. I want to like do well, but not having God in that. So it still felt lonely.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, to recap some things you said, and it's a common feature in mankind and womankind, is that idea of idol shifting. It all boils down to an identity crisis. So maybe to reiterate what you're saying, your identity was in people, and that's why it drove you to people please. And then you made the shift, like, all right, now people pleasing is not the best idol that tickles my soul. Maybe good grades and being a great athlete will give me the satisfaction and confidence and bring my identity to the place I wanted to be. And you find out that doesn't really work out. Then you kind of chase these other proclivities, these other things. And it says, and I think it's Ecclesiastes, eternity is in our hearts, and we're trying to fit that identity piece. That's quite a big spot in our heart. And these other alternative identity idols can fill the spot for a little bit, but eventually they're too tiny for the spot.
Yeah,
it's like
too tiny.
They're too tiny for the big hole in our heart, which leads to the cliche saying, there's a God-sized hole in your heart that only God can fill, which is so true.
So cliche, but so true.
So cliche is so true. Some things are just so true and cliche. It doesn't need to be profound. It's just, again, like you said, though, easier said than done. Sometimes, God doesn't feel like God is filling this God-sized hole very well. Right. And then we turn to other things and like, see, God, this thing did help my God-sized hole. You were wrong. And then you realize, oh, wait, no, he was right.
Exactly.
And then you turn back to God. So I'm curious, I might have missed it. At what point did you enter into a relationship with the Lord on your walk?
Yeah. So, and I've struggled to like really pinpoint a point. And you know how like, it's like, oh, if you're a child of God, you are his, like it's in your heart at some, like it's just in there. Yeah. So that's how it feels like looking back on it. 'Cause I knew who God was in middle school. Yeah. I knew who he was in high school. I was coming to youth, but I was still struggling elsewhere. But I wasn't really following him. I didn't really truly believe in the whole thing. So he was always there. Yeah. He's always there. And then I really didn't come to form a relationship with him until I moved back to Vero. Wow. And so it took me 21 years. But it was such a God experience is the only way I can put it in. I came home and I was super just lonely, very anxious. I had a whole episode of just anxiety. I didn't want to be where I was anymore. I just felt so low. I didn't really see a way out. And I just came home for the weekend. I had just finished visiting my friend. And I saw how happy she was with her friends and her situation and how different it was to mine. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like, I don't want to go back, And not to say she isn't really a Christ follower, but just to acknowledge the fact of like, oh, I'm not where I need to be. Like there's other options of being happy, And I think that really led to a point of, okay, so I came back home. That weekend, I've said it here before, but it was a while ago. I came to church on a whim and I would looked at my mom and I was like, I just need to go to church. I think I just want to go. I haven't been there in a while. Talking of Pathway here, and we went to the 11 o'clock service, and then I saw Nate, Pastor Nate. Yeah. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, is that my old youth pastor? Like, I didn't even think he was still here.
And he turned and ran.
Yeah. But I was like, Nathaniel. No, but I hadn't been here it was 4.5, almost 5 years of like just not even being at church anymore. Wow. And so I was like, fully not thinking I wasn't going to run into Nate, and I was like, oh, I wonder if he still remembers me. And I just remember feeling so drawn to be like, oh, like I should probably go say hi. And like a real tug on my heart. And so I walked my little butt over there, tail between the legs. And I was like, hey, like, do you remember me? And the warmest embrace I've ever experienced of just the biggest hug. And it was like, oh my gosh, like he did remember, how did he didn't forget who I was, And it says a lot to student ministries and just this place in a whole, as soon as that happened, he invited me to come back, and just was like, hey, come hang out with us tonight for a youth group on Sunday with the high schoolers. Yeah. A lot of previous friends of mine will be there too. And he was speaking of Jordan, shout out Jordan, David, shout out David, you, And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. I want to see all these people too. Cause I remember when I was friends with them was some of the best memories I'd had, So I was like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. Let me try it. Came back and the worship, which is so funny because high school worship isn't anything crazy, It's not anything but it's still magical, powerful. But it moved my heart. And I was just like, oh my gosh, what have I been doing? And from that point, I met up with Nate that following Wednesday and Miss Emily too, and kind of just talked some things out with them. And I was like, yeah, like, I don't want to go back. I don't see any fulfillment out of it. And I like want to pursue a relationship with God. Like, I want to start serving and being here and like being surrounded by good people.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where it like ricocheted, like sent off into, then I started serving. And then I basically, I mean, I've always like knew who God was, but I wouldn't say I was like truly saved until that day that I spoke with Nate and Emily, and they like prayed over me. And I just kind of told them, I was like, I want to feel like Laura again. I feel like I haven't felt like myself in years.
Yeah.
You know, and it was in that moment I was like, I'm not going to feel like Laura again without God.
Right.
And that's kind of what Nate had said as well. Just like seeking guidance from like who created me.
Yeah.
And like being able to like look to him and know that like it's going to get better, and like finding identity in him, and like having Laura back per se is like only going to happen with him.
Which having Laura back is really what you're saying is, you know, God's image is inside of each of us. You know, we're each individually, fearfully and wonderfully made, right? And we're supposed to be the best Laura that God has put inside of you, the best James that God's put inside of you. So when you say, I want Laura back, I want that God-breathed, created in my mother's womb, Laura, back in my life.
Yes. Yeah. And I just like felt that tug of like, oh, I just want to feel whole again, like fill that God-sized hole.
Sure.
Because it was empty, so empty. And then, so I'd really say like that was when I truly let God into my heart and was like, I'd never felt peace like that before.
Wow.
Of just, okay, like something shifted in me, and it wasn't from my doing, you know?
Absolutely. It seems like, you know, as an outsider looking in, that was the moment when you fully surrendered yourself to what some people say the lordship of Christ. So for, you know, your middle school years, your high school years, God was in the background. You know, you knew of his existence even. It's not like you didn't believe there was a God or anything. And but he's just kind of a side character. But God doesn't want to be a side character in our lives. He wants to be the main character on our hearts, calling the shots, and then, you know, unleashing the true Laura, the true James. So it seems like in that moment, you're like, all right, God, I want you to come out of the back.
There was nowhere else to go.
Yeah, nowhere else to go. I want you out of the shadows in the background that I've put you in and come front center. Here's my heart. Here's my life. Take it, use it, and boom, you were reborn.
Yeah. And that's, mic drop.
Mic drop. There you go. Boom. Wow. So talk to us now since that, wow, awesome experience. You know?
I know. And it's so funny because I'm like, you always hear like fun, like cool, like crazy testimonies or whatever. I wouldn't say mine's like crazier. Some people are like, oh, my testimony's boring. And I'm like, nothing is ever boring.
No,
but it's like,
sure.
I feel like everyone hits that point. Like, it's just like a magical feeling of like, oh, wow, like there's nothing else left but God.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's supernatural. It's hard to articulate in human
It
words.
really is. Like, and I feel like you can't even, like putting it into words makes it feel so small, if that makes sense.
Yeah, right.
But it's like, oh, like the way my heart experienced that from there on was just,
Well, that's how we know it's supernatural, because it's something outside. We can't, you know, when we try to learn a new concept, we compare it to something we already know, right? That's why illustrations are so powerful in sermons and teaching. But when it comes to the presence of God and that kind of euphoria, for lack of a better word, experience, there is nothing to compare it to, because it's the only supernatural thing that can be done, you know? So it's and that kind of speaks volumes of the experience. It can't be put into human words, can't be compared to anything else on the planet, because it is supernatural.
Yeah, literally. But so fast forward now, having that whole experience, I wouldn't say it turned into a perfect journey of I left everything in the past, you know? Definitely still struggled with some things. Example, anxiety, still struggling with that today. Yeah. But I was finally able to come to a place of peace in knowing that it wasn't just me who had to handle it anymore. Like I could give it to God. Yeah. And I remember even now to this day still, like, I turned and read my Bible to 1 Peter 5:7 every single day for at least 3 months. Wow. Of just cast all your worries and anxieties on him. He cares for you. And I was just like, okay, like, I'm not alone. I'm not alone. I'm giving it to him. I'm not alone. And that's kind of the turning point for me, that I knew I could be able to handle it again. Like I knew I could finally fill that hole and not be so anxious and not have to worry about everything and what everyone's thinking and all of that fun stuff, and not turn to anything else. and just outsource for those like tiny gods.
Yeah.
And then, so I feel like just from that alone, like just seeing how much God has used me and like is going to use me. For example, like just being in the youth ministry, that summer, got baptized in April.
Heck yeah, you did. Yeah.
But yeah, so following that baptism, I spoke at Summer Olympics, and then after speaking and just sharing a little bit of my testimony, and this has nothing to do with me, this is all God, but just like him being able to use me. One of the girls that I was a leader for was like, I want to get baptized. Like, I want to surrender to God, and I want you to be there with me to do it. I want you to do it. And I was like, I don't think I can baptize you, but hey, I'll be more than glad to pray over you, you know? But that just like, I sat there that night, not even talking with her, but like just in my bed, and I was like, wow, I never thought that was going to happen.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And it's something so small, but it was like so big to me that it was just like, God really is using me.
Yeah.
Like, as much as I think he's not, and still try and convince myself otherwise, like, so false, you know?
Yeah, no, so true.
And
God
it
is definitely using you.
continues to show, like, to fast forward a year now. So that was last summer. I got to be with her in her baptism, and I cried.
Yeah.
Because I'm a girl, but I cried.
No,
but, you know,
as you should, man. That's the powerful stuff right there.
But so I was just like, wow. Just being able to, like, share that, and, like, being so nervous ahead of time, and him putting, like, just peace on my heart, and knowing that, so people are going to think it's weird, or not weird, but, like, fear of judgment again. So people are going to judge me. So what? Like, as long as it touches one person's heart, that's all that matters. And it showed. And God showed me that too, of like, no, you're going to share, and it's going to mean something.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a prime example of finding confidence in the story God has put inside of you, because there's a tendency to want to retreat from the details that are kind of low points in our lives. But those very low points could be the bridges that we build to infiltrate the heart of another person in a positive way, right? When we share our stories, obviously there's always wisdom on what parts of your story you share to what context, right? But if the Lord has healed you through it, and I'm not saying we're perfectly through it, right? The things that we've done in our past like to show up again, you know. Unfortunately, on this side of heaven, we still battle our sinful nature, but at least you can share what has happened and how the Lord has brought you through it and how he's continued to sustain you. And though we might falter again, you know, it says in Proverbs, though a man falters 7 times, that says something about the Lord, so we'll keep him up. And 7, I think. I didn't do a full Bible study on this passage, but 7 being like, you know, the number of like completion, meaning like if you fall more than 7 times, God's still going to hold you up. So like, oh, that was the 7th time. I don't want to misrepresent that scripture, but I can't remember the reference on top of my head, but I remember hearing someone talk about it. But yeah, God is using your story and my story and everybody's story, and we shouldn't be ashamed of the story. Obviously, we don't glorify ourselves or our sins in the story, but we show how Christ has made. You know, he took our back dark drop, which makes it, again, refer to the back dark drop, and we can see him even brighter.
And I love what you said about the 7, not the number, but just that fact of like, we're still going to fall. And I think that was heavy on me of like, oh, well, I'm saved now, I should be perfect, but that's not the reality. And I struggled with that for the, like, I mean, I'm still struggling with it. Everyone's going to struggle with it, but knowing that God still loves us, like, past our sins and our struggles, that he's still there, and the fact that we gave our life to him is just like another step of like knowing that we're gonna see him in heaven, and like we believe that his son died on the cross, you know. So it's like, just because we are having a bad day, we're gonna have bad days every day. You know,
absolutely.
But just knowing that regardless of that, it just adds to the story, and it adds to the ability to help someone else that's gonna experience probably the same thing, because humans are creatures of habit, and a lot of the times, like, something that you've gone through, another guy has gone through, vice versa, something that I know I've experienced, I could help with, you know. And
it's real talk, because it'd be really discouraging, you know, post salvation, post
and I think a lot of Christians like struggle with that, and like the fact of like, oh, well, I'm leading now, I need to be perfect for these kids, but it's like so false, you know.
No, for sure. Obviously, there's a difference between willfully like forsaking all things, which I don't think we're talking about that, but just for clarity, but for those who are, you know, we're constantly going to have these proclivities. It doesn't mean we just like, oh, what's going to happen, so let's just give into it. No, it's like, something's going to happen sometime. You fill in the blank with your, whether it's, you know, anger, lust, whatever. And God doesn't remove our status as a child of God. He doesn't remove your impact. I know there's points of controversy for someone who's in ministry if they fall in a certain way. Yes. That's definitely, we need some boundaries and rules. But when it comes to just being a Christian and influencing another Christian, it's not like God's spirit no longer works inside of us when we do stumble.
Exactly.
Repent,
and I'm thinking like stumbling blocks, not like full on.
Yeah. Murdering somebody, you know? Yeah.
Put the knife away.
But even then, Paul was still used by God.
Literally.
So,
but I think like those convictions too play a part in like, you've done something wrong.
Sure.
Like, whether that is like you need to go talk with someone, I think once you're able to not self-hate on the fact that you stumbled, like the conviction of, oh no, I'm going to get through this, you know? Because
usually someone who's struggling with, man, can I be used by God still? Already has a sense like what they did was wrong. If someone's pride and their heart is, stone cold, that's a different category of people. We're talking about people that are like, all right, I'm a Jesus follower. I have the Holy Spirit living inside me. I'm ready to rock and roll. I'm serving at Pathway students. I'm serving at my church. And then boom, I fall. And then the enemy would like to come in and is like, well, you thought you were going to be like great now. That worked out.
Try and send you back into
the spiral of the shame. 100%. Where, Romans 8:1 says there's no condemnation to those who are in Christ. And what that's basically saying is that we are a child of God now. We don't lose that status. And we don't need to be defined. That's the thing. We take an isolated incident or maybe a habitual, because it happened maybe once or twice. And then we define ourselves by that instance, instead of being defined by our status in Christ, which is constant, right? We do a one-time flare up, and now we're defined like that. We do this to people all the time, unfortunately. When someone has a bad day, we say, oh, the real you came out, which is that's so rough. Like
that's like heartbreaking, honestly, because it's like, I bet you wouldn't want to be known for your worst day, because I'm sure it looked terrible.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. We're not... Yeah, which is, man, I hope I have the same grace when someone like flips on me like, oh, so this is how you felt the whole time. No, I don't think though. They just had a breaking point,
Right.
If it's obviously habitual and, there's ulterior motive, that's a whole different thing. But like if someone messes up, it's like, okay, there's grace.
I feel like you should show others grace the way that God's shown you grace, know? So it's like, you can't sit on a hypocritical side of,
I know. It's crazy.
Yeah, but it's hard. I mean, even speaking for myself, I'm like, oh, they're gossiping. But I'm like, hey, come on. I've known to talk a little bit.
Sure. Yeah,
so it's like, it's always sitting in a perspective of, again, we're not perfect.
Yeah. And I think if you have a posture of humility, it's like, all right, I'm so thankful for how the Lord has taken me out of my muck and mire. And when I see someone else, falling, I'm not sitting there on my high horse. I'm like, you're here with us.
Yes. Let's build each other up.
Yeah. It's biblical. That's good. Man, awesome, Laura. This has been a good conversation.
Yeah.
But it seems like we're winding down here. Any final thoughts about whether it's your story or any other talking points that you would like to share as we close this episode?
Yeah, I mean, no, not like any other like real like sharing thoughts, but just again like hitting back on the point of like God's gonna use you.
Yeah,
God's gonna use everyone watching this, and I think just not being upset with your testimony, if that makes sense, like not victimizing yourself in the sense of, oh, I didn't deserve that. No one deserves to go through a lot of the things that they did. But I think acknowledging that God is just using those experiences, because again, it goes back to the point of, oh, well, a lot of people who aren't believers, oh, well, why would God do this if he was real?
Yeah, right. Why would he allow that to happen?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think as like a believer and from being saved, and it's just like, you can sit on that and be like, oh, I didn't deserve to go through any of that. But then you're like thinking about it and thinking about how many other people go through the exact same experience and being like, okay, no, there's a reason for me to have gone through that. Yeah. To find Christ at the end of it, to be able to be used by him.
Right. And that's, man, I'm glad you've gotten to that point. I know that's a tough pill for people to swallow.
Yeah. And it's not easy.
No. And there is an aspect we got to recognize too when tragedy happens, whether it's, what you described in your story or something else. We trust that God is working all things for the good, but it doesn't mean he's going to give us, the full picture itinerary. Yeah. Like this is how I'm using it. Just so you know, James, just so you know, Laura, this is why I'm using it. He doesn't do that. It's a lot of it we don't know until we're in heaven, and we gotta be fine with that. And I know that rubs some people wrong. Like, no, I want to know why a good omnipotent God that can do all things and is all loving would allow such a thing. That it just doesn't. Gotta have faith. Yeah. And I know that's hard to hear.
It's just a perspective and a heart posture at that point, Yeah. And it's taken me a while to get there too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But I think if you can just like fully trust God, and I still struggle with control and wanting to do everything my way, but I think if you put that aside, just focusing on a testimonial fact of what you've experienced is worthy and useful, then you can definitely grow into being able to be like, okay, well, if I can trust God about my testimony and knowing that he's going to use that, then I can trust God to be able to place the like anxiousness and the control issues aside and be able to like serve him and know that his plans are for the good, not mine. Know, I think it just plays into the whole thing.
Yeah, the whole thing.
But yeah, that's all I got.
Love it, Laura. Thank you so much for being on Thrive and Dive.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your story.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Well, guys, I hope you're encouraged, inspired by that. This is Thrive and Dive, thriving in life as we dive into deeper conversations. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.